Hey everyone, welcome back to Pets 101. I'm your host Nick. As always, disclaimers, I'm not an expert or a vet, just somebody that worked at a pet store for a decade, and just a couple of, first-timer tips and tricks. As always, this is not going to be your end-all be-all. If you are planning on getting a pet, please do more research outside of just this silly little channel, and think adoption first. And this is especially true with today's subject, the iguana. I'll get into why in a second, but as always, I also encourage getting the habitat set up first before getting the pet. A lot of people want to try and get the pet and habitat at the same time, and I always recommend habitat first, pet second. And in a way, especially if it's for a gift or whatever, it makes it a two-parter. It makes it more fun because now you get to have that anticipation. But so iguanas. They're a lizard. Some places use them as a food source. Some places use them as a companion source, much like many animals, like the guinea pig. And so with iguanas, though, the reason why I highly recommend adoption first is there are going to be a lot that are out there in the ether up for adoption because the pet parent just did not realize how big these guys get. 6 to 7 feet, okay? It is a lizard that can get up to like 20 pounds, up to like 7 feet long, live up to 20 years. I mean, but average of about 15. But it's a long time pet, and it is a notoriously difficult one to take care of, mostly because of the size. Now, arguably, they have a bit of a temper to them as well, but if handled frequently, they actually do have a pretty docile nature. But yeah, the fact that they need a lot of heat, a lot of humidity, and a lot of room makes this a difficult pet to take care of. So, starting with the habitat, like any cold-blooded reptile, you want to have a warm side and a cool side. The warm side, you want to have, I think, upwards of around like 95 degrees. Definitely double check me on that. Cooler side about 75. The warm side is where you want to have the light source, and the cool side is where you want to have the water. This is typical of most reptile setups, but I just figured I'd get that out of the way. Substrate, in the store we usually used the bark chips because they helped maintain the humidity a little bit better, and definitely a lot of vines so they can be nice to have close to the heat and light source. I always prefer having a heat source that is mostly the pad in the back, but you can also do the heat from the light. But you are going to have a light for two reasons. One, they are just like us. They're diurnal, so they are usually active during the day and sleep during the night. So they need to have a good, cycle going so that it doesn't screw up their day-night cycle. But the more important one is because this is yet another animal. If you've seen my videos, you already know what I'm going to say, that needs a UVB light. UVB is tricky because it's one that it'll still light up well after it's no longer pumping out the UV rays. So you need to make sure that you have a schedule, mark it on the calendar, of how often you're changing it out. I don't care that it still lights up. It's probably not pumping out UV rays after a couple of months. And you can notice the lizard starting to get lethargic, closing its eyes a lot of the time. If it's usually hanging up high by the light and you notice it down amongst the substrate, you have a problem. And that's pretty true of most any lizards. If you have one that starts out healthy and you start noticing a change in its daily lifestyle, there's usually something going on. And that's a typical one that I've noticed is when they're, sleepy all the time, they're not eating. Those are usually good indicators that something's going on. And more often than not, it's that tricky UVB light that it's like, oh, that needed changing, and then they perk right back up again because now they can actually, metabolize their food. Um, so keeping the humidity up is a big problem. They come from the rainforest, so they're used to like almost 100% humidity. So you really want to keep it like 60, 70% as best as you can. And this is going to be tricky, especially later on in life. I mean, you can get a some kind of humidifier. Definitely get, temperature gauge, one for each side, the hot and the cold. But also you want to have a, humidity gauge to make sure that you're keeping the humidity up. When they're small and it's a small cage, frequent mistings during the day can take care of that. Later on, you might need to have a fogger or whatever. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. Once they get to be a certain size, there really isn't a cage that's made for them. Like, you're either going to have to get a custom made or make one yourself. And that usually, is like a lot of wood, wire, and all that kind of stuff. Well, then, the more airflow, the faster the humidity evaporates, so the more you got to keep it there. And there's always an issue of mold, whenever you have humidity that high. So once they get to be the size of 7 feet and they pretty much need an entire room to themselves, trying to keep that room humid without, making the walls warp and stuff, is going to be an issue. So things to think about long term when you're getting one of these guys. Right now, when you get one, you could probably get away with like a 40 breeder. But very quickly they can grow out of that, and then now what are you going to do? So just keep in mind that this is a pet that is frequently rehomed because people just get it, when they're young and small and relatively easy to take care of in the pet store. But that is a baby. That's not even an adolescent. That is a baby. And that thing is going to turn into an adult, and you want to be able to plan ahead that you're going to be able to take care of that adult. Um, their diet is a little bit of a problem as well, only because they are herbivores. So they need fresh veggies, fruit as well, but no more than 10% of their total diet. And fruit, you got to be really careful with. If it's overripe, that'll cause food poisoning for them. So yes, they can eat a banana, but you want to have it be a yellow, like maybe almost green banana. Same thing with blueberries. No soft blueberries. Like fruit, you got to be really careful. It has to be fresh, 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 fresh. Definitely not even close to ripe. But it's mostly going to be veggies. Now, having said that, I have seen in the store the occasional cricket might sneak into their habitat, and I have seen them go after them. Well, apparently that's more of an adolescent thing. It isn't necessarily bad, but pretty much anything that I've ever read has always suggested have it be 100% vegetarian diet. And you definitely want to make sure that you switch up the veggies because I'm blanking on the actual technical term for it, but I think too many oxalates, if they have like the same thing for too long, like so for instance spinach every once in a while because there's so many oxalates that they're going to um, get unhealthy because it's just too much and it just kind of starts to compile up in them. So switching out the veggies. Some of the things off the top of my head is they're a huge fan of bell peppers. Kale, but kale's one where you want to do it not as frequently. Dandelion greens. It's really weird. This is something that's been coming up not only in pets diet but also our own. That who knew that weed dandelion that's been pepper in the yard for pretty much all of my life. you know, oh my God, it's actually the leaves are actually really good for not only animals but us as well. I actually saw a Reddit post where somebody was like, hey, you don't have to go to the store to buy veggies for a while because now my lawn has all of these dandelion and one other flower that you can eat the leaves off of. So that's when you can even actually, go out in your yard. Just be really careful if you're using, obviously if you're using any pesticides, any kind of, chemicals in the yard, so don't do that. Otherwise, you should just go into the store. But yeah, keeping fresh veggies on hand 24/7 in order to be able to feed them daily, twice daily when they're adolescents, can be a bit of a pain. I actually always kind of enjoyed the idea because that meant that now I have the ingredients for salad, and if I notice that they're starting to get a little close to getting brown, well, I don't like to waste food, so now I'm having more salads just to make sure that the food doesn't go to waste because of having said pet. So in a way, they can almost make you get a little bit healthier. Much like having a dog will have you taking walks more often because they need it. You absolutely have to have them go for walks. So now, guess what? Can't have it automated with a robot as of yet. I mean, that's going to be a thing soon. But right now, I got to do the walking. So now I'm getting out and about in the sun. So thank you, Lilu. Lilu Loud for people that have followed the podcast. She's a background taking a nap. But um, when they're young, you want to do frequent handling because I got to warn you about these guys. A lot of lizards you got to worry about them biting. These guys, yeah, but their tail whips are what you really got to worry about. So their main defense is whipping their tail, and I mean, especially when they get big enough to be an adult. I mean, that could take out an eye. That could actually, lacerate you. And like I said, they can be docile with freaking handling, but if you have one that's grown up and it's gotten sexual aggression, when in their 2 to 4 years, that's when they're sexually active, and so they get sexual aggression and they have nothing else to take it out on than then you might have a previously friendly iguana that has now become kind of a dig. So frequent handling, but definitely much like when you get a dog and you have to kind of learn the signals that they're putting out, like, oh, okay, so the tail wagging can be a good thing, but if it's a stiff upwards wag, then it's not necessarily good. Same thing with an iguana. They're going to have a lot of body signals that they're going to tell you, letting you know if it's a good time to handle them or not. And once you get a rapport with them, then the handling becomes a million times easier. So, and I definitely look up some videos on, lizard body language. I don't know enough about it in order to just, throw that into the middle of this video here. But again, this isn't supposed to be your one-stop shop. This is just supposed to inform you that, maybe I might want to start with a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon for my first-time pet, because those guys are a little bit easier to take care of, mostly because of the size. They are also pretty docile and easy to handle. Actually, bearded dragons are kind of the dog of the lizard world. They enjoy your company, whereas the other lizards usually just tend to learn to tolerate it. So, um, you know, the sorry, I'm leaving it in. I know I'm hesitating. It's just making for some bad screen time, but I just want to make sure I'm ticking off all the boxes. So the habitat, you want to make sure it's very roomy, very humid. Their diet, you really want to do veggies, a tiny bit of fruit, be very careful. Protein, maybe if they're young. Most research says that they're supposed to just be exclusively, vegetable, and definitely with the danger of the temperament, oh, and speaking of tails, yeah, they can be a whip, but also these are one of those lizards that, you know, if they're young and they are trying to scoot away from you, and you're like, oh my God, they're about to get away, a person's natural instinct is to grab them, and usually the first thing that you get a hold of, especially if they're quick, is their tail. These are one of the lizards that can drop the tail. So you really want to be careful. You always want to pick them up by the body and avoid the tail area because they could drop it. Quite a few lizards actually do that. I think what are a couple that don't? I think bearded dragons don't, but I mean most any other one does. And especially if you're like, for instance, with leopard geckos, that's problematic because that's where they keep all their fat. They store it in the tail. So if they lose their tail, now it's really difficult to make sure that they always have a good food source. So, but they are a very pretty popular pet. When I was in the pet store, I did a really good job about convincing people to go for something else if they were a complete novice when it comes to it. But, if this video is not to charge you, then, definitely make sure that you check a couple more videos, maybe a few forums, maybe a few websites, get the habitat first. Check out anybody adopting, and that's actually not a bad idea because usually if they're adopting out a iguana, they will come with some of the equipment that you would have had to buy yourself anyway. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, keep them hot, keep them humid, keep them healthy, keep them fed, keep them with hearty vegetables, and keep handling them so that they don't try and whip you with their tail because again, that's a kind of scary, dangerous thing. But other than that, I mean, if you do decide to get one, make sure that you're ready to set aside a good 15, 20 years of your life if you're doing it right. And yeah, if you see any of the signs that I was talking about where they change their routine, they're looking lethargic, obviously any discharge or discoloration, so there's some obvious signs, but there's some not so obvious ones where, if they're starting to act really kind of, lethargic, two main things to check is did the temperature change? Do I need to change out the UVB bulb? Those are usually the two main ones because they will once it gets to like 40 degrees or whatever they'll just straight up hibernate like maybe a heartbeat once every hour, something crazy. So they definitely don't respond well to the cold, and a lot of people don't realize that your house is often at different temperatures whether it be summertime or winter. Excuse me, summertime or wintertime. So you might be using the same lighting during the summertime as in the wintertime. And if you're anything like how I grew up in my household, wintertime, they keep it in, 60 to 65 degrees. If you're cold, get a sweater. And then in the summertime, it's fans, maybe one room has AC, so it's like 85 degrees. So you can't keep the same lights, the same, wattage of light that's heating the place in the habitat if the outside temperature is different. So that's why those temperature gauges and humidity gauges are so important. If it's the rainy season where you are, then the humidity might already naturally be pretty high, so you don't need to mist as often. Whereas during the wintertime and it's just sucking the moisture right out of the air, you definitely want to be overspraying. So that's why it's great to just make sure to keep an eye on what's going on with temperature gauges, and that is something that you don't just buy a gauge and then it works for life. So if you the humidity ones especially, I've noticed, is quite often you see the soil is just soaked, and yet the humidity still says it's only like 30%. It might be time to change out the humidity gauge. So just one last little tip for you, because that's something that I've noticed happen a lot, where it's like, okay, this is saturated. There's no way that this is only 30% humidity. Oh, turns out you need to replace the gauge. So something else to keep in mind as well. But that should be it for the most part. If I've missed anything, please let me know in the comments. I'll do a point 2 video if necessary. But for now, that should be a good start. And like I said, if you decide to go with one, congrats on your new uh, lizard companion. Appreciate you.